But right now, joining us, we're very excited, Texas Senator Paul Bettencourt, Republican who represents District 7 here in Houston, is with us. Senator Bettencourt, welcome to the program.
No problem.
And originally, when we first reached out to get you in, it had just been announced that you were going to be on the newly formed Civil Discourse Committee after, of course, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So I'm curious if you could walk us in a little bit about what is the goal of that committee and what work are you folks doing? It seems needed more now than ever.
Well, Ernie, it's the Civil Discourse and Freedom of Speech and Higher Education Committee. I'm the chair from the Senate side. Terry Wilson's the chair from the House side. And basically what we're looking at is really what happened with after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Where are our appropriate boundaries? You want people to have as much free speech as enshrined in the Constitution, but you also can't let them yell fire in a crowded theater. So we're looking at that, and we'll be looking at really what's happened in the higher education campuses too, to see what policies we need in Texas. Look, the bottom line is the problem we're really in is in this frothy social media age. People do not think before they put stuff out, and that has a tendency to really increase the temperature of what should be rational civil discourse to the point where it becomes completely irrational. And so we're trying to strike that balance.
Mm-hmm. So, Senator Bettencourt, speaking of balance, when we look at in the higher education space, we understand what happened in Texas A&M where the professor was fired after that viral video between the student and what the professor was talking about. In your committee, are y'all having conversations about that as well?
Well, we'll be looking at that too. That's a complex problem when you really look at it. The reason why President Welsh is not there anymore, in my opinion, is that you can't be saying one thing to students on that's being surreptitiously recorded, apparently, mm-hmm. And then say another to the Board of Regents, then another to the Faculty Senate, and another to the people from the Texas Senate that are calling you. Mm-hmm. And you've got to have consistency about these issues. And if you don't, it's just going to eat you up in this social media driven era that we're in. And the fact of the matter is that if you go back and look at that actual course syllabus, which I've actually seen for the first time this morning, mm-hmm. I don't think there's any debate that we should be teaching people to teach 5, 6, 7-year-olds about transgender studies. It's a preposterously wrong thing to do at that age. And that's why that course had been blocked not once, but not twice, but a third time it got out into circulation, and that's what caused the department head of English and the dean of science to be sacked because they didn't even tell the president or the provost about it. Mm-hmm. So we've got to make better decisions about what we're teaching at the universities anyway.
And I want to get back to that. I want to step back just a little bit when you talk about what your committee is looking at and trying to accomplish. When you look at the First Amendment and our current understanding of it, can you make laws that limits certain types of speech? Is that, from where you sit, permissible? Are there examples of doing that? Or is there a different way to approach this?
Well, Ernie, look, I mean, this has been literally at the heart of somebody yelling fire in a crowded theater, okay, right. And there's no fire, okay? Now, when we look at this, what happened with, and look, obviously, this was a political assassination, and I'm old enough to be alive in 1968 when we lost almost Robert Kennedy on live television. He literally walked off the stage, was back in the hotel kitchen when he got shot, and people came back to the microphone and said, Robert Kennedy, Senator Kennedy's been shot. Is there a doctor in the house? Now, Eric Andel, who's even older than I am, have talked about that on my radio program because that really set into us how horrible political violence is. Mm-hmm. And in 1968, you went from that to the assassination of Martin Luther King. You go down a long list. And we go through spats of this in the U.S. history. and so what I'm concerned about is, for the first time, and I'll use a direct example. A Democrat state senator gets shot and killed in Minnesota, if I have the state. The resolution passes the House unanimously condemning it, but Charlie Kirk gets shot and killed in Utah, and there's a whole bunch of people vote no. Now, it's their right to vote no, and it's their free speech to talk about it. But what I don't think we can get to is the point where we're glorifying death like that, especially political assassination, because that brings us down to the level of a third world country.
But I guess to go back to what I'm initially asking, though, is we can see things as that we feel are right or wrong. We can think things are abhorrent behavior. We have laws against violence and assassination and all of those things, murder. But how do you then parse out free speech? How can you, in a committee, you can maybe lay guidelines for suggestions of how to behave in the public square, but can you make laws that limit it?
Well, that's what that entire discussion is about, Ernie. And look, it's tough to do this because, I don't think any of us would on this show would be there glorifying a political assassination of a Democrat senator or a conservative movement icon like Charlie Kirk was. So, because there's some level of common sense that's appropriate, as well as decorum and belief in what's right or wrong. Okay. Now, the problem is we got people that go way past that, and I think we're going to have an honest discussion about what social media does to basically, coarsening the entire fabric of the country, because that's really what's kind of the underlying layer here, and so we're going to have those discussions because we don't have a predetermined outcome. But boy, we need to have a discussion because the temperature level of this has got to come down. When we're talking, like we talked about the voter registration, issue, that's something that Democrats and Republicans should be able to agree. Oh, I moved, so let's, how do I get re-registered? This is not. There's stuff that we should be discussing without having a giant, artillery exchange. And I think that, you look at the some of this violence that we've had, especially on these ICE offices. I think the last shooting where somebody's writing anti-ICE down, but that person ends up spraying bullets at what are detainees, and they're killed. And so we're reaching what is, in my mind, a preposterous level of political violence, and we got to take a look at what the causes are here, and not be afraid to discuss it. Because if anybody covers my local government committee, I have on my committee everybody from a leftist progressive to a MAGA conservative, and we talk about everything, and that's what we need to do here.
Senator, it's Frank Billingsley here. So let me ask you this: the National Guard was not sent to Dallas after that ICE shooting, which you just referred to. But yet the National Guard is sent into Portland, Oregon, where they're having peaceful protests. So what's your take on cities, and especially Texas cities, having the National Guard come in?
Well, I mean, if they're needed, they need to go. It's because, look, what happened is, best I can understand, and I'm not an expert on it, but they basically nationalized the Oregon Guard and sent in 200 people from the Oregon Guard. Okay, great. Now, I did see some video and I saw some people live outside an ICE operation, and they were protesting it, and they were, screaming and yelling and et cetera. It didn't look like they were doing anything except trying to obstruct traffic, but even that's against federal law. So that's a decision that's going to have to be made, city by city. I think that, however, there's a general feeling, and it's I think across the country, that people don't feel as safe as they should in American cities, and whether they happen to have a Republican mayor like Dallas did or a Democrat mayor that Portland has, it shouldn't be the issue. The question is, are there some logical things we can do to try to dampen down violence in our big cities, and if And if there is violence that's being targeted against federal installations, then, the feds have the ability to do what they've done, which is nationalize, local state guardsmen and put them out as support troops. And importantly, I think we need to have a discussion about what is appropriate that actually works. You look at D.C., it was an absolute mess until there was a big deployment, and that has dramatically dropped violence in that city. Now, how long it stays down and what happens in the future, we don't know yet, but we know that carjackings plummeted, and I think members of both parties, especially in D.C., were just tired of staffers. And even some cases, members of Congress getting hauled out of their car, beaten up, or in the worst case, killed. So we have to not be afraid that additional policing is the right answer.
Mm-hmm. You're listening to Hello Houston. We are speaking with Republican Senator Bettencourt. You can join the conversation at 713-440-8870. And we do have a call on the line. Sarah from Montrose. Sarah, welcome to Hello Houston. What is your question for Senator Bettencourt?
Hey, so Senator Bettencourt, I remember my early days campaigning with you and my parents, who were Christian Coalition chapter presidents. I remember you with Ted Cruz at the early Tea Party Republican meetings down in Clear Lake. My husband was on your radio show once or twice with Lieutenant Governor Patrick. And so I've always appreciated the way that you handle practical issues in a nonpartisan way. You did so as our tax assessor collector. But my question for you is, going back to your comment where you say there are some logical things that we can do to dampen down violence in our big cities, why is it that it feels like, as Senator Cruz pointed out over the Jimmy Kimmel thing, why does it feel like the GOP is prioritizing one amendment over the other, i.e., do you feel like reasonable gun control and operating within the bounds of the Second Amendment granting us the right to freedom of arms, why are we attacking the freedom of expression and freedom of speech? And we're not afraid that once you guys are not in power anymore, that's not going to be turned against you and that your freedoms aren't going to be tamped down in the same way.
By the way, Sarah, that is exactly what Senator Cruz had to say. Okay. When he was after, let's see, who was it? One of the Trump administration people said basically, it was a question on the FEC. And he said that if you go down a path that basically, effectively threatening somebody's license is good for this administration, then what's going to stop in the next administration that somebody threatening somebody else's, broadcasting license? Right. And I actually said on my program, I said, he's absolutely right. And I actually have also commended him for what he said after the ICE shooting in Dallas, that this level of political violence has to stop. Look, you have to be willing to talk about everything. What the commission, or what our joint, it's actually a joint committee, sorry, it's not a commission, is trying to do is, okay, let's go look at what happened in San Marcos. Why did the student, get tossed out, and then he's now said, I made a mistake, and he's got a GoFundMe page, and I think he's reached his goal about getting back into school, which I think is a great thing. But I actually want to ask him to come and testify because he's somebody that's gone through the process, and I want to know what he was thinking, what he felt like happened to him, and what do we need to do to get through to people not to go down the same path that he did. So no, as at least I'm only one half of the committee chairmanship, but the other half is an Aggie and a very practical guy too. So I assume we're going to have everything on the table.
I want to take a moment. I know we're short on time, so I want to move you over to another committee that you serve on, and that is disaster preparedness and flooding. We're curious about updates on Kerrville and the surrounding area. What have you got for us?
Well, I'm asking the water board to give me a response on how we're doing on that project once a month. And I expect that the bill just got signed, obviously, in September, and we'll have a pretty good update on what we're doing. They've already started the work on scientific basis, Ernie and Frank, of looking at some of the topography there, making sure they know what portion of that flash flood alley needs to be covered. So they're making some initial progress, but I don't have a report yet. But Ernie, but as soon as I do, I will call back and say, let me on.
Well, what's your thoughts on reopening Camp Mystic so soon?
Well, look, we don't do bills of attainder, okay, like the old Star Chamber in England. And we set policy, and that policy has dramatically changed. If you're a camp, you have to follow all the new rules. And the only way you're going to reopen is if you follow every rule of the letter. There are no exceptions. So there's a lot of there's a lot to do in some of these camps, and of course, Camp Mystic's at the center of it, because their response was, quite frankly, we heard some just absolute story of overwhelming grief with the families that lost their children there, because they made a fundamental decision. Instead of evacuating children to higher ground, they let them stay. They told them to stay. And that is the first thing that has to change for any camp, that they have to have an evacuation plan. And so I'm going to wait to see, exactly who is complying with the law, because the law has to be applied equally, even in the most horrendous death situation, which is what I consider Mystic. They have to be able to say that they're following the letter of the law, and if it's not good enough, we have to change it. But more importantly, the law exists not just criminally, but civilly. And I expect that, just by any rational view of this, there's going to be some major lawsuits filed shortly, if they haven't already been filed.
Speaking of lawsuits that are filed, really quickly, your thoughts on how things are going to go for the new congressional map. Do you think it's going to go into effect? Where are we standing with that? You got about a minute to answer.
Okay, where it's going to be in El Paso next week. There's going to be some preliminary hearings. It's a novel approach, Bernie. I Ernie, have no idea what's going to happen, but I do want to tell people to vote for their homestead exemption increases on the ballot in November. Have me back. We can go over ballots. Let's see, Propositions 9, 10. Let's see. It's at 11 and 13, if I have the right numbers.
We'll definitely have you back to walk us through those. You know those better than anyone, so we'll appreciate that.
Senator Paul Bettencourt of District 7. Senator Bettencourt, thank you for always making time for us on Hello Houston.
No, I just love the live calls, okay?
Yeah.
All right, call me back.
Thank you.
All
Will
right.
do.